My friends Mary and Steve are wise in many ways, but it has to be said they're a bit dense as far as railways are concerned. And they came here once for a picnic on the way home from Manchester to Newcastle. And they stopped here because they liked it. They were aware of the viaduct as a sort of dramatic addition to the landscape, but they were just pleased to be on their own. So anyway, they just got out the cheesy comestibles when they were surprised, nay, very surprised, to discover that dozens, possibly hundreds of cars came charging up and screeched to a halt. Myriads of women in anoraks leapt out and started pouring tea out of flasks, and flocks of men with cameras stood there looking nervous and poised like anxious gazelles. Steve and Mary had no idea what was going on. I told you they were a bit thick in this regard, when suddenly a steam train appeared on the bridge. And then the flasks were hurriedly packed away. The cars started and zoomed off again, pursuing the train to the next photo opportunity. And my friends were left alone, puzzled but peaceful. I believe they fell asleep. They usually do on such occasions. This, of course, is the Ribblehead Viaduct, one of the great set pieces of the British railway experience and much loved by train spotters everywhere. It's on the Carlisle to Settle line, which was opened in 1876 and closed in the 1960s, but saved by the passion of the railway enthusiasts. And now, as it passes through some of the most beautiful landscape in England, it's like a dream, almost a fantasy of what the great age of the railways was like. This line was built and run by the LMR, the London and Midland Railway, which was based at Derby, and the style of its stations is known as Derby Gothic, and very pretty they all are. They were built by the company architect, John Holloway Sanders. The countryside that the line travelled through is not only very pretty, but also remarkably uppy-downy, which meant that it took a tremendous amount of engineering and effort to build the railway. In fact, it took 6,000 navvies 7 years, from 1869 to 1876, to build the 72 miles of track, and that included 14 tunnels with a total length of 4 miles, almost exactly, and all of the numerous valleys had to be crossed by 17 major viaducts, which required the building, I have calculated, of 150 arches. And this is Carlisle Station, the end of that particular line. It may not be the greatest station in northern England, we might have to argue about that particular crown later on, but it's mine, and I've always loved it. This is where I used to come, night after night, Saturday after Saturday, in me little short pants with me pencil and me book of train numbers in me hand, lusting after steam trains. If I got here by 8 minutes past 4, which meant getting away from school pretty smartish, I was in time to see the mighty Thames-Clyde Express, which would have just arrived from the very line that we've just been following. Why do boys do that? You never see girls do it, do you? I don't think I've ever seen a girl train spotter. Are boys more systematic? Do they like ticking things off? Or are they just more boring? I think I'm just more boring, but I love it, always have loved. Love anything to do with railways, which is why I feel so lucky to have lived in the north, because we've got better railway stuff up here than anywhere else in the world. We've got stuff which tells you all about the history of railways, but we can even tell you about the There's evidence that railways were invented by the ancient Greeks 2,500 years ago. They didn't have engines, of course. They were invented much more recently, but they had rails to help wagons roll along more easily. The Romans had them too, and there are illustrations of them in use in German mines in the Middle Ages. That's what this is here. It's a walk through the woods now, but it was a waggonway built to take the coal from the mines of North Durham down to the ships on the River Tyne. Because Durham was full of coal mines with good coal quite close to the surface, but a long way from navigable rivers. And in the past, before there were any proper roads or railways, water was the only affordable way to transport coal. So they built waggonways on nice easy gradients, and they laid rails for the wagons to roll along. And of course they were pulled by horses in those days. The first waggonways were built in the early 1600s, and over the next couple of hundred years, hundreds of miles of them were built. And there are dozens like this one, which still exist as footpaths and cycle paths. But for a long time, everyone thought that none of the original wooden rails had survived. And then, about 10 years ago, an old pit heap was being cleared at Lambton on the outskirts of Sunderland, and a full set of them emerged from underneath the ground. Extraordinary. They're still there, but carefully covered back over again by the archaeologists. I said before that they built the waggonways on nice, easy gradients, but in the northeast that's not always possible because there are savagely difficult gradients which horses and wagons, lacking my grace and fitness, could not possibly have managed. So on this particular waggonway, the Tanfield waggonway on the outskirts of Gateshead, they built this. It's called Causey Arch, and it was built in 1725. Its arch has a span of 105 feet, and when it was built, it was the widest single-span bridge in Britain, and it remains by far the oldest railway bridge in the world. There was so much money in coal that it was worth lashing out on all sorts of engineering solutions to help move the coal efficiently. Several pits on the north side of the Tyne had the whole of Newcastle between themselves and the river, so they built tunnels to run the waggonways through, deep underneath the city. And in other places where the landscape made it impossibly steep for horse-drawn transport, they came up with a variety of alternative ways of moving the wagons. There's one place at least where you can see some of these methods still in practice, and that's here, the Bowes Railway just outside Gateshead, which was designed in 1826 by George Stephenson as a way to get coal down to the Tyne at Jarrow. The waggonway was 12 miles long, but the middle section of it was very steep. One of the systems they used was called the balanced incline or the self-acting plane, and this is how it worked. On the line there would be 6 full wagons of coal with a rope attached to them that went right round a huge drum a bit further up the hill, and then the rope went right down to the bottom of the hill, a mile away, a mile of rope, where it was attached to some empty wagons. And when you pushed the full ones off down the hill, the empty ones acted as a sort of brake for the full ones, while the full ones pulled the empties back up to the top of the hill. I mean, how clever is that? How environmentally sound? Nobody knows exactly when this system was invented, but it was way back in the 1700s. But by 1809, another cunning wheeze had been developed, and that was the idea of using fixed and stationary steam engines with long ropes or chains to haul the wagons. Here at the Bowes Railway, that process went on right up until the 1960s, using an electric winch. And it's been preserved here in full working form, the only working preserved standard gauge rope-hauled railway in the world. A real throwback to the technologies developed before the world-shattering invention of steam locomotives. So the colliery waggonways had already begun to provide most of the features that were going to lead to proper railways as we know them today. But the great engineering breakthrough was still to occur, getting rid of the horses and replacing them with something that could haul proper loads of coal. The invention of the steam locomotive. Steam engines, fixed ones, had been invented way back in the 18th century, but the development of moving engines, engines on wheels, only began in about 1800 and continued on till by about 1820 hundreds of miles of waggonways were powered not by horses but by mechanical monsters. This one at Beamish Open Air Museum is a replica of a machine called the Puffing Billy, which ran at Wylam in the Tyne Valley from about 1813 or 1814. The transformation of colliery waggonways into the sort of railways that we understand nowadays was a complicated process, with lots of different people making contributions. But it is a remarkable fact that it was a process driven by men from the northeast. It was coal that started the railways, and it was northeasterners in the coal trade that came up with the ideas. Of course, it wasn't exclusively a northeastern club. Honesty forces me to admit reluctantly that it was a Cornishman called Richard Trevithick who made the initial breakthrough. But it was here that the transformation really took off, and boy did it take off. It led to the extraordinary riches of the golden age of railways in northern England. The world's first proper railway, in the sense that it had trains always pulled by steam locomotives and that it was specifically designed to carry passengers, was the one that opened between Liverpool and Manchester in 1830. And this is a bit of it. This is the bit at Rainhill on the outskirts of Liverpool, where on the 6th of October 1829 a trial took place to decide whose locomotives would be chosen to run on the new line. This particular place was chosen because it provided 2 or 3 miles dead flat and dead straight, which was, of course, great from a trial point of view, but just a touch boring from the point of television pictures. Apologies for that. But as far as I can recall, there were 5 candidates made it through to the Rainhill trials. They were a pretty odd bunch. I don't think it was that difficult to dismiss the cyclopede, which managed a less than impressive 5 miles an hour by dint of having a couple of horses galloping along on a treadmill on top of a truck. Perseverance was a proper steam engine, but it fell off its wagon on the way here, and it only managed 6 miles an hour. One of the front runners in terms of speed was an engine called Novelty, which achieved a spanking 28 miles per hour, and then blew up. So the final winner was the famous Rocket, designed by the great Geordie engineer George Stephenson, which seems appropriate somehow because he was the man who'd already surveyed and constructed the line itself, and the whole project was inspired by the earlier railways that he'd built in the northeast. So what did he build? What was this first proper railway like, and what's left of it? Well, he built a railway which was 26 miles long, from Manchester along there to Liverpool up there, through places like this. This is Newton-le-Willow's halfway along the line, which was to become almost defined by the railway. George Stephenson and his son Robert, who were, if you remember, responsible for the steam engines, should have had them built in their factory in Newcastle, but it was too difficult to transport them across country, so they started a locomotive works here, which was called the Vulcan Works. It opened in 1830, and for more than 100 years it remained one of the most important railway works in the world. Like everything else, it seems, it's gone now, and there's an industrial estate in its place. And they built a company town to house the factory workers and the railway workers. It was called Earlstown after James Hardman Earl, who was one of the directors of the railway. And this is Newton-le-Willow Station, which along with a couple of others around here is the oldest working station in the world. Now there is a claim to fame.
That's the oldest railway viaduct in the world as well, again designed by George Stephenson and opened in 1830. It's called the Sankey Viaduct, and incidentally it crossed the Sankey Navigation Canal, which was the first canal to be opened in Britain. So here we have the world's first railway viaduct, outside the world's first passenger station, crossing Britain's oldest canal.
It's not a bad record, is it? And in fact, there's more. Because in 1831 there was another railway opened, the Warrington and Newton, and that caused the world's first railway junction as well, here in Earlstown. That's a lot of firsts, isn't it, boys and girls?
And yet there's more. The world's first proper railway line opened on the 15th of September 1830 and led to the world's first railway accident and death. It happened here, at Parkside, just outside Newton-le-Willows, and the man killed was William Huskisson, the MP for Liverpool. The train he was on had stopped to take on some extra water, and people had got out and were standing along the track when another train, in fact it was the Rocket, driven by none other than George Stephenson himself, came along in the opposite direction. There was a bit of a panic, and in the rush to get out of the way, Huskisson tripped and fell, and the train went over his leg and crushed it. He was rushed off to get medical assistance. George Stephenson drove him in Rocket, in fact. They went 15 miles back to Eccles, near Manchester, at an unprecedented average speed of 36 miles per hour. I don't think anything man-made had ever gone that fast before, but it did no good at all. He died. This is his mausoleum in St James Cemetery in Liverpool, designed by John Foster Jr. in 1833 as a copy, you might be impressed to know, of the Choragic monument of Lysicrates in Athens. Well, that's what my book says anyway.
Do you know, I feel really sorry for William Huskisson because his death seems rather absurd somehow. And the train can't have been going that fast, and to be the first to die on such an occasion. But you know, he'd never seen anything as fast as a train before, and he hadn't been very well apparently, and he was over 60 just like I am, and you can get more panicked more easily when you're that sort of age. One witness described him as bewildered. He just made poor choices. And he slipped.
It could happen to any of us. It often does. The Liverpool end of the world's first proper railway has been demolished, but this is the Manchester end, Liverpool Road Station, which, like everything else that we've been seeing, opened in 1830. It was only a station for a few years because it was superseded by bigger but not better ones, because this is a superb little building. The building to the left was the station controller's house. Let's hope he was the fat controller. That's earlier Georgian. It was built about 1810. But this is the station in a nice Greek revival style.
Now, it's got two doorways, second-class doorway, first-class doorway. Which one's right for me? Need one ask? One knows one's station in life. Good morning, man.
This building forms the basis of the Manchester Museum of Science and Industry now. But despite being the earliest station in the world, it's got everything that we still expect from a station. Ticket offices and waiting rooms, of course. And beyond that, a canopy for passengers to shelter under. And platforms, not raised ones. Raised ones were invented a few years later. These ones are flat and level with the line, like continental ones still are. And on the other side of the line, the world's first railway warehouses, big and bold and brick.
What a place. The very beginning of the railways, and already the scale is big and confident, and it kept on growing. Over the next 50 years, this area of Manchester saw an explosion of architecture and engineering, the glory years of the railway age. Remember 1830 and the station at Manchester? Well, This is Newcastle Station, which was begun just 15 years later. It's my favourite station, the first of the truly great stations. It was begun in 1845 and opened in 1850 by Queen Victoria, who snubbed Newcastle ever afterwards, incidentally, because the new manager at the station hotel next door handed her the bill for the banquet that followed the opening.
But she must have been impressed by the building. The great arched roof supported by curved wrought iron beams, the equally great curving sweep of the platforms and shed. This is great engineering and great architecture too, and of course it stood the test of time. It's just as vibrant and beautiful today as it ever was in the days of steam. That's the station from outside, as grand as they come. And that's Queen Victoria's infamous station hotel. And this is George Stephenson, who started off building waggonways and went on to build the Liverpool and Manchester Railway and scores of others beside.
He was just a Geordie mine engineer. In fact, when he was called before a committee of the House of Commons to give evidence, they had to bring in a translator so they could understand him. But when he died, and when they put up this statue to him, 100,000 people came to see it unveiled, because he and his fellow northern pioneers had transformed the world.